So Mr. Quit Puppetry is got a room full of puppets there. What's that
I
about?
quit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, me too. I quit performing.
I uh I quit taking things I don't want to do.
Yeah, that sounds healthy.
I can't yeah, I don't want to do the birthday party I don't want to do. Now I'll do a birthday party I want to do. Like 2 weeks ago I did a birthday party for a friend in Atlanta for his 4-year-old. And I took it because I could subsidize having a weekend of seeing people in Atlanta. And I also liked my friend and wanted to, he couldn't get anybody else. I was like, I'll do it. So,
Nice.
but people don't understand, like, you're either doing it or you're not. And it's like, no, it's not really all or nothing. It's not really absolute. I'm
Right.
not really going to do every birthday party that comes down the pike because I don't want to.
Right.
I'm not going to, yeah, no. I would like to have a little more discernment as far as what opportunities I choose to take advantage of.
Right.
I don't want to have to do all of them because I don't know when the next one's coming along.
Yeah, that desperation, it makes it kind of a miserable game.
And it was for the better part of 30 years. I mean, you do it long enough and you think, oh, well, there's opportunities. The work speaks for itself and the word gets around. And, you know, you're going to have these repeat gigs or word of mouth is going to spread and the work is just going to perpetuate. And what do I have to worry about? So long as I can keep my hands over my head, I'm going to have opportunities. And then all it takes is like a global pandemic to make you realize that, well, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a strike,
Right.
double strike.
Or just change in administration as far as like these the libraries or the school or whoever it is that has to do all the booking for that kind of stuff.
Right.
They may, whoever changes out, yeah, you might be dealing with somebody who's in charge of that stuff for a good percentage of their career, 15 to 20 years. But if they retire or they leave and somebody's replaced and they may have a different agenda or they may not, yeah, there's so many invariables that
Right.
you just have no control over.
Yeah.
And that's always been the nature of it. I mean, really, that really has. This is not a new problem. It's not a new obstacle, but after a while, especially in the situation when you're a solo entity where you have to wear all the hats. I mean, this is what I sort of tell people is that what really got to me in the end was having to wear all of the hats. The schizophrenic nature of
Hmm.
having to be the guy that does all the business negotiation and the business side of things, as well as being the happy-go-lucky friendly artist that everybody wants to deal with and have come back to their wherever.
Yeah.
And it's just like having to be the jerk and to be the guy that everybody likes at the same time. Just really, it's enough to tear anybody apart.
Yeah, you're not just a puppeteer, you're an entrepreneur and you have to do all
Correct.
that stuff. The hustle.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, at this tier, there's not enough money for more than just one person. Like there's no money in it for an agent, for a manager, when you're dealing with like library and school and regional theater kind of situations. That's just the nature of it. What's 10% of under $1,000? Not a lot.
Yeah. It's not a
So
lot.
it's gonna hardly be worth it for somebody to say, "Why, yes, I'm going to represent you, and I'm going to take that burden of all that business stuff off of your shoulders." So, yeah, it just never happened.
Yeah. Did people tell you, did you get the note, do what you love and the money will come when you were
Oh
younger?
gosh, I hated those things. Who was Red Skelton that said if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life, and that's such bull crap. You work harder. I did have a graphic designer put it sort of best. Her mantra was, "You work twice as long and twice as hard, but only when you want to," which is also not necessarily true because a lot of times you have to do it when you don't want to because you got to make the money somehow.
Yeah, or when you're sick or when things
Correct.
less
That
than
was always the worst. Like having to do these shows when I was battling something, and it never failed that at some point in a summer tour or the winter doing stuff around Christmas time, I would get sick and I would have to do these shows with, and they were all live. Nothing was pre-recorded except maybe the pre-show music. So I would have to do like this cavalcade of voices with hardly any voice. It was just awful. I
Oh.
hated it.
Did you ever use pre-recorded audio for your shows, or are they too interactive?
No, no. When I started out, when I was a teenager, that's just because I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, the guys that I looked up to, they were all live guys, like Terry Snyder, Grace Seal, Hobie Ford. Those guys were all solo puppeteers, and they all performed their shows live. So it's kind of the school I came from. That, and it's like when you pick it apart and weigh the pros and cons. It's like, well, yeah, maybe you could have a more layered audio soundscape effect for your shows by having them pre-recorded and having, different voice actors and this kind of stuff. But it's also on a track, and if something goes wrong, or something happens, or to you, or to the show, or to a puppet, or whatever, it just that track just keeps barreling right along,
Yep.
and there's no there's no panic. You can't pad if
No,
a rod gets tangled or something else like that. So
that's
it was
true.
always sort of a way to build in. Um, if in case something goes wrong, you sort of have a certain amount of control over uh, how the show continues.
And do you find kids interact too, and that sometimes you have to like talk to them as a puppet, or does that not
Oh,
happen?
yeah, no, I mean, what I sort of realized is that the shows that I did with All Hands Productions were really dialogues with the audience, and they work best when there was that sort of two-way communication. I guess three-way, if you want to think about me and then the puppet and then the audience as three parts of this equation. But they always worked best when it was a give and take with the audience, and the audience was the definite integral part of that communication process. And if they were distracted or something happened, or they just weren't into it, the whole thing just broke down.
Yeah. Did you ever bomb like as a as a puppet show? Did you have shows where it was just like that was terrible?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and it was a bad gig. It was a corporate event for the employees of a state power company,
Oh boy.
and it was like a setup as an outdoor festival. It was on these big fairgrounds. They had these carnival rides. They had a whole concession stand. I mean, it was like you're going to the state fair, but it was just for these employees of this power company. And so they had they, in typical fashion, they had the flatbed truck for the performers. It's like there were three of us. There was like a magic show and me and something else. I forget what it was, but it was like I read that and it's like this is where vaudeville went to die. It really went to the kiddie, the kids entertainment, the kids
Yeah.
tent
The state
circuit.
fair. Yeah.
Oh, that's like when that's the magician, the puppeteer, and the animal person or whatever, whoever they were. And then so they had stairs to the flatbed truck in the middle of the front of the stage. Now I don't know if that was a mistake and the steps should have been in the back,
Huh.
but they were in the front. And so here's my puppet stage all set up on this flatbed truck to do my show. And it's not there are times listed on the sandwich board, but it's not a structured thing. It's a fair because people can do whatever they want whenever they want. So I'm trying to do my show, and it's a miserable experience from the get-go. And these two kids, I can't see anything when I'm backstage. It's not like I have a scrim and can see out. So I'm just sort of working blind as far as like I don't know if anybody's out there or not. It's just showtime and I'm doing the show. And so the next thing I know, these things are coming over the playboard. Like it's stuff. Like I don't know what it is. And then I realized that there are little hands that are reaching up on the playboard, smacking the puppets. And I was like, they had climbed the stairs,
Oh
these two little jerk
no.
kids, and had just decided, they were going to wreak havoc. And there wasn't anybody else. There were no grown-ups around. There was nobody else but these two kids at the top of the stairs, just wreaking havoc. And so I quit. I
You
stopped. Said I'm not doing this.
That's awful. Were there other people watching, or was it just
No,
you?
no, there was nobody else around.
Okay.
Because
Oh,
once I realized what was going on, I sort of, I tried to say something over the microphone, like, "Hey, let's not do that," or whatever, and it just continued. And so
uh,
then finally, I just like stuck my head up, and there wasn't anybody else out there. So I was like,
uh,
"Well, if there's nobody here, I'm not gonna do this." Like,
yeah. What's the point?
I'm out. Thanks.
But you still got paid, right?
And I got paid.
That's good.
It was a 2-day event, as I recall. I can't remember now. But it's been a while ago. But yeah, that sort of ranks right up there as one of the worst.
I feel like outdoor stuff is always bad news too. Like maybe
Yeah.
I haven't done birthday parties, but are they not the exception? I was trying to make an exception.
Oh, well, you get all sorts of like what people consider indoors. And for a lot of people, because I would tell them after a while, I stopped doing outdoor altogether. Just it's like, I'm
Mm,
not, I don't want to be exposed to the elements. I don't want my stuff, I don't want to have to make the call between, am I going to save the audio equipment or the puppets? I don't want to ever have to be in that situation. That, and especially in the South, there's no way I'm doing an outdoor show in the dead of summer. I mean, think about right now, we're in the heat indexes in the hundreds. It's like I couldn't imagine doing an outdoor show in that kind of heat.
you can't.
So no thanks. So a long time ago, I stopped doing outdoor shows. The rare occasion I would do them, but they would have to pay a non-refundable deposit. Uh,
Mm,
but then you also get the people that would say it's indoors, and then you show up and it's just covered, like it's a pavilion, it's a tent, it's a whatever it is. But they thought, oh, it's covered.
right.
It's like that's not the same.
Yeah, the winds can still get in.
That's
Mud.
yeah,
In mud.
yeah.
What would the dream job be for you? Like what would we don't I can edit all of this by the way, so like we can
Why? It's so spontaneous. Um, I have no idea. I mean, I have less of an idea about that now than I may have even had 5 years ago. I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
I think what the ideal situation, I don't know, this is not the job, but the situation I would like to find myself in is a balance of being able to have a stable, steady income, doing something that I may not necessarily love, but I can do, uh, and which also allows me the opportunities to be have creative, take advantage of creative experiences, either going to do shows or making stuff here or whatever, to be able to take advantage of creative opportunities as they come up. So
Okay.
I would that's the ideal for me, I think, right now, is to find that level of balance.
Yeah, you like the stability of the job.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked a sales job here for the last better over a year now, and I mean, I'm selling a product. Like,
Yeah.
it's a wholesale distribution company, and I'm on the telephone. We take corporate orders from people that sell this product in their stores, and so I'm not a telemarketer necessarily, but I'm sort of an order taker over the phone,
Mm.
dealing with sort of the last vestiges of people that refuse to interact with the internet. Uh, Anything that I do could be done through the company website. I am just facilitating those folks that categorically not doing it.
Is that an age range?
You can imagine.
Yeah, okay.
Uh, um, I'm not going to speak disparagingly necessarily just because they have been my employer. They gave me a job when I'd never had work experience. Like, let's face it, I had been 25 years working as a full-time professional puppeteer with my own company and had never worked outside of like just out of graduate school. I had a retail job for a little while and
Mhm.
that was it. Like, I had no resume or CV to speak of that reflected any kind of work experience in a legitimate workplace. So I'm grateful that they gave me the job. That it sort of showed me that I can function in that sort of environment. I do like my coworkers. It's a small mom and pop company too, so we're not talking about like Amazon or Google or some big conglomerate. Um, so um, yeah, I liked the fact that I did see coworkers every day because in my freelance life, unless I had a show, um, I could go days or weeks without seeing anybody but the local barista.
Yeah.
That would be my social interaction would be who was at the coffee shop, or if I happen to go to, my watering hole at night and saw the bartenders or whatever. I mean, that my social interaction with people could be very limited, face to face. Like, social media is one thing, but it's no substitute.
Absolutely.
So this at least got gave me a reason to get out of bed every day. I had to. I couldn't afford not to. It put me in a situation where I was dealing with interpersonal communications and relationships every day, which was also good for my mental health.
Mhm.
And the paycheck every 2 weeks was also reassuring to know that I was going to be able to cover most of my bills. Um, so yeah, those three things led to a lot of. Um, I could have been a lot worse off because in my situation where sort of everything just like hit the fan all at one time, it was just like
I
it
remember.
was done, it was gone. And
Oh,
without any warning, while most people were, stressing during the year of the pandemic, when they're on lockdown and can't leave their apartment or their house or whatever, and are stressing during that year, I had a great year.
yeah.
I had a fantastic year in 2021 because I was doing live streams for the Center for Puppetry Arts. Was able to take advantage of those opportunities because they needed something to justify the loan money they were getting. And so I was able to provide programming for them. Um, and when I wasn't doing that, I was getting unemployment. I had the fattest financial year of my life.
I know.
I
Yeah.
had never been able to qualify for unemployment before through the state of Georgia or any place else. And then, gradually all the politics got involved and Georgia revoked all of that stuff. And you had to go back to the old system of unemployment for which I did not qualify. And then everything dried up. Like, nobody was opening yet, or they were opening and then they were closing again, or they were scheduling stuff and then they were canceling. And, you know, nobody was in a situation to say, well, I'm going to book this, but if you cancel it, you still have to pay me, because nobody knew what was going to happen. Like, everything was so up in the air. You couldn't like stick people to pay you. They would just like kick the can. I had one library that kicked the can for 3 years. They paid me and they said, okay, well, when we open up it again next year, and then it was the next year, and then it was the next year. And I had to give them their money back because, you know, I closed.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And that money had long been spent. Uh,
Oh, that was so it hurt.
so
Yeah.
um, it was not great, and so I didn't have any performance opportunities open up, and then the real estate sellers market boom. Uh, I'd been living in a split level house in Decatur, Georgia for 7 years, which I worked out of, I lived out of, and it had been a great place. I love that place, but it was a rental, and so as soon as the stuff started to sell, I had just renewed the lease in November. The property management company notified me in the middle of December that the owner intended to sell, and I had 60 days.
Wow.
So here I was thinking, and I had already started to float the idea of like, okay, I'm renewing my lease in November. I'll have a year. We'll see what comes out in the wash. If the performance opportunities are really dried up, well, then maybe it's time to think about, maybe moving back to Alabama, maybe, something. But I did not expect it to be like, oh, you're doing it now.
Do you think you would have done it otherwise? Do you think you needed that sort of like implosion of everything at once?
Maybe. I mean, I was kind of in a not great place.
Yeah.
Um, it had really started to get to me that I was on the road a lot, that I had to schlep all this stuff every time I went to do a show somewhere. Um, I was having to do stuff I didn't necessarily want to do, as far as like I was having to take gigs I didn't necessarily want to take. I was still frustrated with a situation where I felt like there were performances I was or venues that were taking advantage of me that weren't paying me what they should have been paying me. Um, yeah, there was just a lot of frustration, sort of, because I wasn't um, well, I wasn't happy for one thing, but I was just like at odds with the whole thing, just because I'd been doing it for so long and realized that 25 years of the business and only making maybe a fraction more than what I was, you know, 3 years into doing it professionally. I think I started when I started, I was charging like 75 bucks a show when I was a teenager.
Mm.
And then gradually, by the time I was out of grad school and doing it, I was charging maybe 200, $250 a show, which wasn't that much less than what I was charging at the end. I know nobody likes to talk about prices. Like nobody likes to talk about money
I
and
do.
all that kind of stuff. I know, I do too. Like
Yeah.
at the end,
Better
I
than
was trying to get 450 a show. That's what I was trying to get per show. But
yeah.
then you do these library tours and they're unlimited budgets.
Yeah.
And so you go to their system and you do a whole bunch of libraries in their whole system and you're there for like 4 or 5 days and you do an upwards of, I think, Charleston, South Carolina, I was doing 14 shows in their system. So it looks like a big paycheck until you break it all down and realize what you're making per show. And in those situations, you're not just setting up once and there for the week. You're having to go to every little branch library
I,
all over this county. And, you know, in that situation in Charleston, I would do 3 to 4 shows a day.
oof.
So it would be like, get to the place, set up the show, and I would have to like be on speed to I would have to fast speed up the process of setting up the show and taking it down. Now the show had to be 40 minutes. The show had to be 45 minutes because we want a 45-minute show. But my normal 40-minute setup, I would have to do in about 20. So it would be like get there, set it up, do the show, take it down as quickly as possible,
Wow.
drive whatever distance to the next gig, to the next branch, and then do it all over again. Drive to the next branch, do it all over again. Drive to the next branch, do it all over again. And it was just exhausting and unsustainable, not sustainable at all.
Yeah.
Um, and especially not if you break it down per show, what I was getting per show for all of that. And then some of these places, some would put you up, some wouldn't put you up. I mean, it was just kind of all over the place. And it just kind of like got to me toward the end, as far as just like,
Yeah.
what's the point?
You feel you burned out? Would you say that you burned out on it? Because I feel like
Yeah,
I
no, completely,
yeah.
completely. Because you would have, I mean, people would love the shows. I mean, the audiences were great. They would come up, and that's the other frustrating part too, is like I would want to interact with people when the show was over, but because of that timetable, it did not allow for it at all. Now,
Oh,
maybe if I'd had somebody on the road with me that could do all of that stuff, which allowed me to go out front and to like talk to people and, foster these relationships with the audience in the towns and the places where I went, that might have been different, but there was just no way to do it. It was just, you couldn't. It's like, I'm sorry. If I talk to you now, I'm going to be 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late to get to the next place. So I'm sure I came off as rude or brusque or whatever, because there would be people that would want to come up and say, "Oh, we loved your show," and some kid would bring a puppet, and as cute as can be, but it's like, "I'm sorry, I have to take all this down and I have to put all this stuff and I have to," no,
yeah.
sleep. You're on. The train has to leave the station now. Probably should have left 5 minutes ago. just
Yeah.
because it's like they're trying to cram all of this into 1 week. It's like you're going to all of their branches in a week. And, Pam, it could all be moot because, like, you see state after state now where politics are getting like they're coming after the libraries for one reason or another, and they're trying to withhold funding. So, I mean, that problem could just be a moot one anyway. I hope that's not the case. Like, library funding is so important, and like library programming is so important because it's free. It's
Right.
free to the public. It's not, not free to the library. Somebody's got to pay for the performers and everything else because it's a way to make a living. But for the general public, it's the best ticket price in town. Sometimes you get what you pay for.
Right. Well, you find there are like crummy shows at the libraries. It seems like there's a lot of quality. No? Yes?
Some of the most um, for me entertaining, painfully so, was going to the library performers showcase.
Right.
This was where a statewide or regional something, and they happen all over the place. Um, all of the children's librarians are looking for their programming for the next year or whatever, and they just get these all performers to come together. You can either sign up, and depending on how organized they are, they may have a list or whatever that you can sign up for ahead of time. But it's just this like cattle call of performers that cater to their children's performers or library specific or whatever, and it just runs the gambit. Oh my lord, the whole spectrum is there, from like people who are really great and who are seasoned professionals, and it shows. And then there is the retiree with nothing but free time that just loves the children.
Oh,
And it's like they have no business being up there.
wow.
And yeah, some of it was just really painful because this is not something that everybody can do. The good ones make it look easy, sure,
Yeah.
but it's like, yeah. And the ones that do it because they love the children were the ones I hated the most, because most of the time, they didn't charge much. They charge, oh, I just do this I love the child. I don't need the money. I'll never forget this. I had a children's librarian came up to me after the show, or I guess it was before the show. I'd gotten there really early and had set up, and the children's librarian came up. And the first thing she did, which I always hated, was leaned on the puppet stage. She just leaned on the puppet stage as if it was a piece of furniture. And she said, "You make a good living doing this?" And, and I said, I guess I do all right. I mean, I've been doing it for a while. And she said, I thought maybe, I would maybe do something like this to make a little extra money. So I thought, I would give this a try. I'd maybe do some puppet shows. I just wanted to be like, for one thing, it's like, you know what? Go ahead. That was finally, because this is too hard. This this stuff is really too hard to just dabble. I mean, this is a commitment. If
Yeah.
you want to do this, it's going to suck up your time. It's going to suck up your money. It's going to just suck up everything. Uh, and sometimes for a payoff, and then sometimes for not, or maybe not the one you expect or the
Right.
one you want. Um, I mean, that's just it. You want to do something for a little extra money, there are easier ways to do that
Yeah.
than thinking you're going to break into the library performer market being a puppeteer.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Yeah, but I don't think people realize.
That's not to be discouraging, but if that's the attitude you have about the approach, I mean, I wasn't worried that I was going to have any competition there, but it's
Right.
like I also wasn't worried that she would actually follow through. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. What did you tell her? Did you say anything, or did you just laugh at her?
I mean, I forget what her specific questions were, but yeah, that just her overall general attitude. I mean, you sort of have to be polite and diplomatic and just say, "Oh well, ha, 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 yeah, sure, why not?" I'll tell you one sad-ish kind of story. There was a guy who I got to know through some folks in Atlanta who he had been I think he was a school librarian, and then during the summer months he was a puppet enthusiast. He was a diehard puppet enthusiast, and he was a member of the Puppeteers of America. And so, I mean, he was fairly legit. And so, in the summers when he wasn't teaching school, he did library performances, and he had these were very traditional marionette shows. And he had built the puppets, he had built the sets. He had also meticulously built everything that so everything would fit in his Volkswagen or his station wagon rather. And so these he made the boxes that everything went in, and it was all custom made, so everything would fit just so in his station wagon. And so he had gotten older, and of course he had accumulated all of this stuff. You know, as puppeteers who do their own work accumulate a lot of stuff of the shows, the puppets, the sets, the stage, all of that, the stuff. And so he wanted to do something with it. Like he was really at a point where he couldn't do any performances anymore. His wife was encouraging him to maybe get rid of some of this stuff. And so these friends hooked me up with him, and so he had me come over to his house, and he had brought out some of the things. And well, it turned out, you know, I thought he just wanted me to come over and see what he had done, you know, to look at his work, but it turned out that it was a sales pitch. Like he wanted me to buy his shows to learn them so that I could perform them.
Huh.
And it was just sort of this cringy moment of like, I kind of already have my shows. Like I already kind of do my own thing. Like it was just like I don't know what the proper response is to like, I don't want your legacy.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so cold and it sounds so cruel. And it's, you know, not a blight against or a slight against their work or anything, because I never saw it. Like I never saw any of the shows themselves,
Mhm.
but it was just like, I don't know what to tell you to do with this stuff. I wouldn't know what to do with my own stuff. Like I don't want anybody doing my shows if I'm not doing my shows.
Right.
Like somebody else needs to be doing their shows. Like they need to create whatever shows they're going to do.
Right.
Um, to the, I don't know, just the idea that you would feel like whatever it is you're doing is so important that someone must do these shows after I'm gone because it's my
Right.
work or whatever. It's like, I really, you know, I started doing shows when I was 18, and that was 1996, 95. I mean, I was doing some of the same shows at the end, and they were still fine. Audiences still resonate, you know, they still resonated with audiences. But
Mhm.
I mean, even just 3 years on now, since I've really touched any of that stuff, I don't, I would want to look at them again.
Oh yeah.
Just to, oh yeah, like just to see, would this still work?
Right.
Just because I think some of it's dated or some of it's a little out of touch, or, you know, some of it was just, it resonated at the time or whatever. But you know, I don't know, I could be wrong. You know, that just could be my over analytical
Yeah.
brain that's sort of thinking about things. But I just would not want, I don't think preservation in that way is necessary or needed, like or in my case wanted. Like I don't want it. um
Yeah. For any work, like I kind of agree. Like some things are meant to live and then die, you know. But then there's other things like the Muppets, which you could argue maybe we should let them
well,
die, you know. Like yeah,
Muppets were a product of recorded media.
exactly. Yeah, not so
they they weren't necessarily designed or uh, targeted for live audience experience.
right.
So they exist in a different media scape as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
Um, Now, certainly when all that stuff was started, there was nothing like social media where you could just watch these things as many times as you want. I mean, most of the time, and I was still part of the generation where this was true. You saw it once, maybe.
Yeah,
You'd get reruns of Muppet Show, you'd get reruns of the series episodes, but Muppets of Bremen, once. That came out once.
that's true.
And and you did like Great Santa Claus Switch. That never aired after it initially broadcast. So yeah, I mean, you have all these little things that were done that didn't see the light of day again until much later, when things like YouTube and stuff were around to be able to take advantage of absorbing that media.
Right.
But they were still part of broadcast. They were still reaching a million person audience in their heyday and before. I mean, it was just they were part of the culture as well. I mean, they were just part of that 70s and 80s pop culture that resonated with people. What I do is on such a smaller scale, such a smaller scale. I mean, max, I'm reaching a 600 to 800 person audience at a time.
Right.
Sometimes I had an audience of 3 once.
Yeah, too. Yeah.
I had a great time, but
Yeah. Do you like the like ephemeral nature of performing, or would you like your stuff to be filmed more, or like in that? Would you be a puppet filmmaker if you were to go back? I think is what I'm asking.
I don't know. Um, I certainly enjoyed working in TV. I certainly enjoyed the experiences I had as a performer, but I don't know that I would want to wear any other hat besides that one.
Mm,
Uh, Wearing all of the artistic hats in the live aspect is one thing, but when you're having to, say be Jim Henson, where you're having to coordinate all this stuff, and maybe you're not doing everything yourself specifically, you're not taking on all the tasks, but you're overseeing the people that are doing over all the tasks.
yeah.
That's a different beast. That's a different beast entirely. I think he really got energized by it. Like I think he derived a whole lot of pleasure out of seeing the work that people were doing, as well as manifesting his own vision and coordinating all of that talent. I think he really, and he did a lot with it. Like he gave a lot of people opportunities to perform, to create, to be artistic, to writers and crew and everything else.
Yeah.
So I just think that was his calling, was to work in that industry, and said as much. He didn't set out to be a puppeteer. He set out to work in television.
Yeah.
And I think that was because he did envision himself in that role of being a producer.
Right. Producer, director.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would
So I don't know. I don't know that I would want to. I've made my own little weird things as far as like videos on YouTube and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
But that's so small potatoes. Like it's they're funny little clips.
Right.
And
Fun.
that's what I feel like making.
Right. You were pretty close to Jane, weren't you, Jane Henson?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Jane and I, we had a friendship. We met in, I guess, around 2005 or six. Um, Controversial or not, at the time Disney was looking for a B cast of performers,
Ah,
and it was under the Disney umbrella. It was supported by the family, which made it legitimate to all those of us that participated. And
mhm.
that's how I got to know her, was through some of that. And then later on, she got to see my shows, and she liked them. She endorsed them, which was not always the case. She she getting that endorsement was not easy.
Really?
Uh,
She was very
oh no, she was very protective of the Muppet style of doing things, of the look, as well as the performance style,
mhm.
all of that. So I mean, she had a great distaste for people that tried to do Muppet style stuff on their own, and so that was, I was nervous. Like the first time I knew Jane was in an audience of one of my shows, I was completely nervous. I think that's probably the most nervous I've ever been doing a show. because it could go either way. Like if she didn't like it, whew,
It would hurt. Yeah.
uh, because she was also one to tell you when she didn't like something. Like
Oh,
she was not afraid. I mean, she could, she could be diplomatic about it, but she could also be very in your face. Like she would hold no punches.
wow.
Um, so yeah, I felt very lucky that so I don't think I've really breathed a sigh of relief bigger than when she said, "I have no trouble endorsing what you're doing."
Oh,
It's like,
yeah.
thank the Lord.
Did she give you notes or like direct any of your work at all?
No, she was a big fan of it. Like the Carriage House hosted, I got a Henson grant in 2010, I think, to do the Reluctant Dragon,
Mm.
and it took me a long time to actually bring that to fruition, just because like I psyched myself out about it. Like um, I hadn't really walked in with a clear vision to begin with, and then sort of when I got the grant, I like was like, oh crap, it has to be good. And then I second guessed everything. I third guessed and fourth guessed everything,
Mm.
and finally, it finally happened. And the Carriage House, that really they would do live puppet gatherings, but it was mostly for adult stuff. So I think I may have been the first family oriented show that was offered for audiences at the Carriage House,
Mm.
and she sponsored that, and it was great. We had a great time. Uh, the show developed further even after that, so it was a good little springboard for developing that show.
Nice. Wow, what a mentor to have. Like,
She was great. We had a lot of fun together. Like we laughed a lot. That's mostly what I remember. Is just she had a great sense of humor,
mm,
and she suffered no fools. Period. And and it was she was just great to hang out with. Um, she could be intimidating, but if you got past that, and she accepted you, and she was just really easy to get along with. My favorite thing is I guess it was the Atlanta History Center had the Jim Henson's Fantastic World exhibit that was touring at the time,
mm,
and it was done in conjunction with the Center for Puppetry Arts. It was not theirs. It was a separate thing anyway. They wanted to have for the opening of the exhibit, they wanted to have a demonstration of television puppetry, and so the History Center, in conjunction with I guess Henson, I'm not sure, uh, approached the Center for Puppetry Arts and said, "Do you have somebody that could do this?" And I was back in Atlanta at the time, and they said, "Well, would you do it?" And so I said, "Okay." So they had set up the camera and the monitor, and I brought some puppets and set them out on a table. And so I was, just demonstrating monitor puppetry and inviting people if they wanted to come up and take a puppet to do a puppet. And
mhm.
some people were, and then here comes Jane and some of the Henson people that were with her at the time, and was like, oh, okay, well, and then of course everybody knew who they were, and everybody just sort of like stood there going like, oh, I don't want to be in front of Jane Henson. I don't. I guess that was the intimidation factor there.
I
And
wouldn't.
so then Jane came over to the table of puppets and to me, and she said, okay, which one am I? And and I said, whichever one you want, Jane. And she picked up Norbert. It was a version of my purple guy, Norbert. It was the initial the first puppet of him. That's who she picked up. And so we walked over, and I wish there had been a tape. I wish there had been something in that camera rolling, because I have a few still photographs
Oh,
that a friend took of that exchange, but uh, Jane and I performed in front of a camera, and and she hadn't lost it. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know when the last time she picked up a puppet was, specifically a Muppet puppet. But she was responsible for most of the auditions as far as Muppets were concerned. Like she was the talent screener back in the day.
oh,
So you would have to go through a training, like those big cattle calls that we all heard about that lasted for a couple of weeks. Like Jane was in charge of those, and so all the talent had to pass through her first, really.
wow.
And so, but she was still like, she hadn't lost her lip sync chops or anything, and it was great. It was really a neat experience, and then like to have these photographs of like, holy crap,
Yeah,
There's Jane with a puppet and me with a puppet, and it's like that's how it, yeah,
yeah, and
that's
she's
pretty
really
special.
she's kind of half of the legacy. I mean, like we think of Jim as being the Muppets guy, but she is half of that, you know.
Probably more.
More right, and then she
Uh, I,
kids attention.
I mean, you certainly can't undercredit her contributions, and not just by association. Like, I really think that she was the creative springboard. Um, Maybe all this stuff did come from my Jim's head or his thoughts and ideas, but he had to bounce those ideas off somebody. Like, they had to be bounced off someone,
Yeah,
and not just the creative aspect too. But never forget that, I mean, he was running his own business, and she was part of that business. Like, she was definitely part of, you know, all of that, and had to have been privy to the negotiations of the business deals, like Wilkins Coffee or whatever. Like, I
right.
don't think Jim was in a vacuum making all of those arrangements. So, um, yeah, she was an integral part to why the Muppets were successful and why Jim himself was successful.
Did she ever talk about that, like the early days and
Not that I can remember. I do remember one. The Hensons had optioned a biopic, and so they were having a sort of meeting amongst themselves and were looking through the script the day before, and I was privy to some some conversation about how they were portrayed, how Jim and Jane were portrayed in this biopic script, and they were just completely wrong.
um
I think the common misconception is that Jim was sort of like this shy, you know, quiet, reserved, like nerdy kind of guy, and that's not who he was. She took real. She said, "Well, that's not the way I remember it."
really, what was he like? Was he obnoxious?
Well, I think he just had a lot of confidence. Like, he might not have been terribly outspoken, but I think he certainly had a lot of confidence about himself and about his abilities. Um, yeah, and I think that it may have been a quiet confidence. Like, I don't think he was necessarily an extrovert,
Right.
but he wasn't mousy either.
Okay. Huh, interesting. Um, if you could either build or perform, what would you choose? What do you like more? Because it seems like you build a lot. Like look at the look at the collection behind you. I mean, come on.
I mean, that it was always sort of a symbiotic relationship to me. I never saw it as an either or.
Hmm.
Um, the guys that I respected, especially who were the live puppeteers, built their own stuff. Like the guys I talked about earlier, Terry Snyder, Gray Seal, Hobie Ford, like all those guys made their own puppets.
Right.
And it's because there was this the visual art aspect as well as the performance art aspect of it. I don't think I could extract, especially not doing my own work. Now, if I'm doing a TV show or whatever, that's different because generally speaking, I'm going to be hired as a performer. At least I used to be.
Mm.
And so you show up and there's the puppets and, and which is great. I mean, that's got that, honestly, that's the best part of television is because you have one job. Like, you just have one job.
Right.
And it's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's just one.
Yeah. And you
You
have so
just show up and you do your bit, and you have to be in a really uncomfortable position or situation for an extended period of time, and throw every joint in your body out of whack. But I just do that one job. Like, I don't have to coordinate anything other than that.
yeah.
But as far as my live shows, I mean, or as far as the work that I do, I get a great deal of pleasure out of designing stuff, seeing something that I imagine on a piece of paper and then comes into 3 dimension. It's just like I can't really think of an experience that tops that. And then to be able to like perform it and create a character out of it,
Yeah.
um, you're just that creation process is just really unmatched. I mean, it's one thing when you're an actor and you create a character that you're performing, and the costume informs you, and the makeup informs you, and all those other elements that come into play to make a cohesive performance. as an actor. But then when you're a puppeteer, I mean, it's sort of like you can play with the whole thing. I mean, you can play with the design for as much as you want. You can play with the physical, like changing of the thing as much as you want. And then when you put the thing on and try, you can play around with that as much as you want. It can be such a fluid process. And sometimes you go in with a very specific idea about what it is that you want as an end result. And then sometimes you have just a concept or you have an idea. Um, and the whole thing is just can be as organic as you want it to be.
Yeah,
and and
world.
that's very rewarding. It's very satisfying in that way.
I agree. Yeah. Do you think in terms of character first, or is it all over the place? Like,
It depends.
yeah.
Like for the old shows, there were definitely characters I designed based on who I wanted the character to be, or how I knew they fit in the character dynamics. And so, yeah. But then I have characters like Chubley here that he was really just an experiment as far as like I just learned this technique of boiling fur to get that sort of weird mangly crinkled up texture.
Mhm.
And I made a puppet just to be able to experiment with that textile work.
Okay.
And so he's been around for a long time now,
Yeah.
actually. He's been for
He's
a lot of stuff. And but he was born solely out of like, well, I want to try this and I'm going to build a puppet in the process.
right.
And I didn't think he was gonna, I certainly didn't intend that he was going to become the character that he became, and that he is. But yeah, you never know.
You never know. Yeah. And then how do you
And
determine?
then some of these characters on the wall were intended for one of my later shows, and it was for I'd gotten a Henson grant to do a version of the Pied Piper that I call the Pied Picker,
Mhm.
and it was a banjo player that had to run a bunch of roaches off instead of rats. And so two of there were a whole bunch of characters that were in the town of Hamlin, where that this was the destination point.
Mhm.
And I had created this whole dynamic with characters and the mayor and like trying to establish all this stuff. And I took it out I built the puppets and I had my friend Scotty Rowell made these great costumes for them. And they looked exactly like the drawings and I loved them and they were a lot of fun. And then I got them on the road and I started doing the show and it just felt something wasn't working. Something just, it felt like it just hit this point and it would drag. And I was like, you just need to take them out. And it was like two characters just shucked them. Like I took them out of the whole thing, and suddenly it was like, yep, that's what needed to happen. And it
Wow.
was simple because like I had added too much.
Right.
I just put too much in there, thinking I had funny ideas and character play and dynamic in mind. And I mean, I had the right sort of mechanics, uh, and the characters were fine. It was just they were not needed. They, they talk about that a lot. It's like you really have to not be precious about the stuff and just edit.
Yeah.
Um,
Really early.
you have to know how to sort of ruthlessly edit the stuff that you do, because if it's not driving the story forward, like if it's not helping things, it's just nobody cares.
Yeah.
And so I had to let go of it, and it was just there's nothing wrong with the puppets. There was nothing wrong with the characters. It just slowed the show down. Like it just didn't add anything to the story that was trying to be told. And that's the other part too, is like you can look at something, you can try to look at something as objectively as you can when you're working on it. And you can see at the time when you're so micro focused on it, when you're working on it, how everything is supposed to be uh, helping the story along. Like it's all integral, and you can see that. And then you get it out there and you put it in front of people, and it's like, well, that's not nearly helping as much as I thought it was, or that's nearly not nearly as essential or necessary as I thought it was, or that's a long way to go for a joke that isn't necessary or needed, or that's a great character that really doesn't do anything, and the audience doesn't care. So it's like when you get to those points, you can sort of like finally take a step back and realize, well, maybe they need to go bye bye.
Yeah. And how do you discern
and
that?
and it did, and it freed up the show, and it made it a whole lot better.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like you knew exactly where to look though. Like how do you, I think a lot of people,
But it wasn't until after I'd done the show for a year. Like
Oh,
I did the show with those characters in there for, a solid season of library bookings.
yeah,
And
yeah. Okay, that
I
makes.
was fiddling with that thing up until the end. It was the last show I did live before the lockdown. Heather Henson had sponsored some performances of the Pied Picker at the American Banjo Museum in Oklahoma City,
Oh,
which
I
is a
remember.
great place, and I can't endorse it enough. So if you're ever passing through Oklahoma City, go see my friend Lucas Ross at the American Banjo Museum.
Oh, I've heard of Lucas. Yeah.
So she had sponsored the shows, and I did 2 days of shows, and those were the last shows I did in front of an audience, and that was when I finally hit upon like the way it needed to be. Like I had cemented the show uh, as it was, as I thought it should have been done
Yeah.
from the get go and going forward. And it's like, well, that's it.
Yeah. I had an act like that. I got it. And then, that was part of it anyway, so I kind of didn't care. Yeah. How do you find it overwhelming to perform all those characters? Because it's just you up there. And a question I get a lot from people is like, how do you perform as a solo act with a bunch of puppets?
Yeah, and there were a lot of puppets in Pied Picker. I mean, most of my live shows had a range of anywhere from, anywhere from 7 to 20 characters, I guess, or 20 puppets. Um, I think Reluctant Dragon had the least amount of characters. It had two, four, it probably had 6 to 8 characters in it.
Wow.
Um, yeah, but everything else had much more than that. Um, and you can only have on two at a time, and sometimes you can get away with like a voice off stage being the third or whatever. And sometimes I would totally play that up,
Nice.
and that's it. It's like you just have to. Who is it? Michael Frith said that doing this stuff is just problem solving, and that's really what it is. Like you're you're creating the puzzle that you're having to solve yourself. And which was a lot of fun. And most of my shows, well, I'd say all the shows were pretty fast paced. Like they nothing was. I would not call my stuff lyrical at all. It was much more slapstick. I would tell people it was Looney Tunes meets a Muppet Show.
Mm.
It's sort of these like um, comic scenarios, comic character interactions, um, done with a Muppet style of puppet. And it would be usually it would be a fractured fairy tales. So it would be stories you're familiar with, but they would be my, twisted take on it. I could never, I even tried, like when I tried to do Jack and the Beanstalk, I said about trying to tell it, this is the traditional way to tell Jack and the Beanstalk that everybody knows with the cow and the beans and the blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I'll never forget, I was at the Puppet Show place in Brookline, Massachusetts, and I had just done a run of Jack and the Beanstalk, which the what it does is it plays with the audience's expectations,
Mm.
and it the story backwards and forwards, like you do, and what the show ends up doing is playing with that. It's what every improvisation sort of does or strives to do. It plays with your expectations for comic effect.
Right.
And that's exactly what Jack and the Beanstalk, or my version of it, does. And so I just done these shows, and the audience had filed out of the little theater there, and I was coming out front to sort of like not take a victory lap, but you had to pass through the front to get out of the theater. And so I'm, just myself off and adjusted myself to go outside and maybe go have lunch or whatever. And this lady was out in front. She had a pair of twins with her. And I was visible in parts of the show, so she knew who I was. And she said, "Did you do the show that we just saw?" And I said, "Why, yes, I did." She said, "We didn't like it." And I immediately was like, "Oh, oh." And she said, "That's not the story. That's not how it goes." And I said, Well, I mean, I was trying to play with it a little bit. She's like, well, that's not the story. That's not the story. She just was not having it. And it was her that had the problems. The kids were, they were all doing other stuff. They were running around like little banshees. But it was, yeah, she just, the other time I, I could hear, I could hear the audience even if I couldn't see them. And so I had an audience for Jack and the Beanstalk, and it was a grandfather sitting next to, or it was a parent, it was an adult and a child at the theater together. And the adult was saying, well, you know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, that Jack had a cow that he sold for some magic beans. Well, is that the show you're going to see today?
I love it.
uh, and most of the time, people were fine. They they enjoyed the surprise element, especially the kids.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, just because I realized at some point down the line, like, this is how I tell a story. This is what is uniquely my voice
Yeah.
in telling these stories. Um, Not that there's nothing wrong with adapting the text in a traditional way and all that stuff. That's fine. It's just not how I realize that that's not how I tell a story.
Right. Right. How long did it take you to figure that out? To find your voice like that?
Well, when I realized it, it became instantly more difficult to create a show.
Really? Why is that?
Well, because it's like, well, okay, it's I have this voice and this is how I do this, but it's like, how how am I going to do this now for this new thing I want to work on that doesn't make it sound like the other stuff? Like, how is it unique for this show? Like, how is it unique for this piece
Mhm.
and not a repetition of the show I just did or all of the rest of the shows that I do? Like, why is this voice necessary for taking on this material? Um, that that was what became more challenging,
Wow.
was how to twist it.
Right. The David Stevens
You
twist.
got this way, or
Yeah. Right.
it's like,
Interesting.
uh, and then yeah, that just became difficult after a while, as far as like how outlandish and and again, does it help the story? Like, is it a twist just to be a twist? Are we just messing with it to mess with it? Or are we messing with it because it serves the whole, does it serves the thing?
Right.
Um, and is it effective? Uh,
Right. It has to be sort of
and
holistic.
is an audience going to buy it? I mean, that's the other part of it too, is like, audiences, especially audiences of children, are not dumb. Uh, I think they totally get miscredited or underestimated far too much of the time, when
Mhm.
it's like they'll see through that stuff. Like, they know how to see through edifice every time. They can see through it, and this is like razor sharp. It's like, no. And if you don't come from a place of being authentic or genuine or something where you have a strong foundation in what it is you're doing, they'll buck you off every time.
Mhm.
Um, and that's, you can't go into it timidly. And I'm sorry, but you just can't go into it as a phony either.
Yeah.
Um, kids know they were always the best critic. Um,
Yeah.
Here's a story about that. I had done a show of Billy Goat Scruff and other stuff for a group of teachers. They were having some sort of conference. I think it was in Georgia, or maybe in Alabama. I can't remember now. And they had asked me to come in and do my show and talk about how puppets can supplement the classroom experience. And the beginning of the show has it's a musical number with no dialogue, with two chickens, and the chickens are exactly identical. And they do this weird little slapstick comedy routine to some jazz music. And so after the show was over, um, which involved Three Billy Goats Gruff, a version of Little Red Riding Hood, a version of Three Little Pigs, so classic fairy tale stories that everybody knows.
Right.
And so they open it up for questions after the shows for the teachers. And the teacher asks a dumb question like, "Is the wolf single?" Ha 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 ha. all this kind of stuff. And there was one kid in the room, one kid in the room. Her little hand went up in the back, and I called on her, and she she didn't know how to ask it, like she didn't know how to verbalize the question, but I got it. I knew what she wanted to know. She wanted to know if it mattered which chicken went on which hand.
Oh,
Think about that. Think about that technical question.
yeah,
Does it matter that because they're identical? And I
yeah,
said, it does. I have a chicken that's made from my right hand and one that's made from my left hand. Think about that question.
yeah.
And she had to have been like 4, 5, like she was small, like she was a child. And just they'll surprise you every time. It's like,
Yeah,
did not expect that question. I've never been asked that question. And it's like, there it is.
that's great. Yeah, I think kids are really smart at it. They haven't been tainted by the world yet.
Right. And I would encounter those kids all the time. And I mean, sure, you'd encounter plenty of jerk kids too, who were just not going to be impressed with anybody or were going to look like they weren't impressed by anything. But that's, child development and all that kind of stuff, personalities.
They're adults
Um,
like
correct.
fully grown
Correct.
adults.
Um, but I would also have plenty of people that would come up to me and say, we enjoyed that more than our kids did, or as much as our kids did. And I never came from doing this from a place where I felt like I had to only include, audiences 12 and under. Like if you're there and you're an adult or older than this targeted age group, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to endure it. It's like, no, if you are excluding any part of your audience, because they're all your audience, if they're there, if their butt's in a seat and their eyes are watching you, they are your audience too.
Yeah,
And that's the whole age scope. All of this stuff that is just like, we're going to target 2-year-olds or we're going to target babies or whatever it is. It's just like,
yeah,
no, no. Then you know why they're targeting. Like as soon as the word target is used, you kind of know what the point is.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And it's not for um, entertaining. It's not for the audience's sake.
right.
So yeah, no, there would be stuff in there for grandmas as well as for, you know, I would always get calls too for like, especially birthday parties. They would call up, the parents would call up, it's like, is your show suitable for a 14-month-old? And I would be like, well, I don't know your 14-month-old. I don't know what day they're going to have. I don't know how they respond to this stuff in general. I don't know. Like,
Right,
it's not targeted for your 14-month-old.
right,
But I would have plenty of parents that said, they would have an infant in arms or a baby in arms or a, toddler that just said, she couldn't take her eyes off. Like, it's like, she's never been this still. And it's like, that's a great compliment. But it also just meant they were having an okay day. And you caught them right, you caught
yeah,
them at the sweet spot when they weren't ready for a nap.
right,
There's so many variables at play that may or may have nothing to do with the show that they're seeing. Like,
yeah,
I'll take the compliment. Like, I'll take it. Like, sure, great. If they liked what they saw, were entertained by what they saw, that's fantastic. I'm glad.
right.
I hope you take this as a step to maybe expose them to more things like this. That's ultimately what you hope, is that you're not going to be the be all end all for their performance experiences, but you
No,
hope that if it's a good introduction, that you maybe try something else. Maybe we go see something else, um, because ultimately that's, I think, been one of the harder things to come back from, and who knows if it will ever fully come back post pandemic. Is like, are people going to see stuff? Are people going to back to theaters to see stuff?
yeah.
And I don't know, because I
Not doing it anymore. Yeah,
I
I don't
haven't
know
done I
either.
haven't really done any shows in 3 years.
Yeah.
I just did some library shows in July. I did a week of shows for the Mobile Public Library System here in Mobile, Alabama, and
Mhm.
they were my first performances in about 2 years. Maybe, well, no, more than 2 years, since 21.
Wow, how'd that feel?
And weird.
Be rusty or?
And I did something new. I took the opportunity not to trot out old material, um, because I didn't want to, for one thing, and I got tired of schlepping a puppet stage, the sound equipment, the puppet trunks, like, and I had a pretty small hall to begin with. Like, it was pretty manageable, but it's like, I want to simplify this, because the Mobile is also one of those library systems where I was doing multiple shows a day in multiple branches. And so it was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to simplify this. What is absolutely necessary to do a quality performance for a mixed age audience? What do I need? And it's like, well, and what do I want to do? That was the other part of it too. Like, what do I want to do? It's like, well, I'd like to do more music, because I would play the banjo in some of the shows, and people would always say, "Oh, we wish you played more banjo." It's like, I would also like to play more banjo. So I'm like, well, there's going to be music components to this, and it's going to be songs. Like, it's not going to be she'll be coming around the mountain. It's not going to be any of that stuff. It'll be my material. That's not necessarily for children, but it's also not necessarily exclusively for adults. I got songs about biscuits and gravy. I got songs about a train, like, and
Yeah.
they're just kind of folksy, country-ish songs that, they're not kids songs. And I get so tired of like Baby Shark and all that kind of kid
Oh
song
my
crap.
gosh. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do my songs, and that was the other part of it too. Like, if I had to go into public domain, I'd go into public domain, but I certainly wasn't going to do any material that had to be licensed or any of that kind of mess. So I was going to do my songs that I like to do and that kids like, and I'm going to develop. I've wanted to use Chubbly. During the pandemic, I did some live streams on Facebook that were sort of like half hour. I think they were half hour. I can't even remember if they were half hour or an hour. Doesn't matter. But it was my songs. I would do a set of songs, and I'd throw a couple of puppet elements in there too, and I would do them like once a week, and people really responded to it, because there wasn't a whole lot for people to consume as far as like media or stuff, and it was a way to connect and all that kind. And they were really great. I love doing them. I love putting those little programs together, and so I thought, well, I want it to be this, like, whatever this is for these library shows. Like, I wanted this to be the model for it. Those live streams. So there were some puppet elements. I did Chubbly. I had this idea. I'll tell you where this started. So there's a famous Muppet bit where they would take a whatnot and change his face, like, on camera, so that the audience could see like how a character could be created and changed using various facial features and all this kind of stuff. And I had a friend of mine. So I'd seen that years ago. It's in there somewhere. It percolates. And years later, a friend of mine who is a luthier, does a lot of instrument repair. He's also just an eclectic guy, like I'm an eclectic guy, and a real sweetheart too. He turned me on to these little neodymium magnets, these little earth magnets. And because he would use them like as tacks on a bulletin board, like that's how he would tack up notes and this kind of stuff. He would also use the stronger ones as clamps when he was holding like pieces of wood together or whatever for the tops of instruments or violins and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And I was like, these are great. Like, there's actually, like, trying to do anything with regular like refrigerator magnets, forget it. Like, there's no pull there.
Yeah.
But this is like, holy crap. And so at the time, I was developing something for this company called Young Audiences. I was developing a show. They were reaching out to children's performers to create new material that could go under their banner. And I had this idea, like, they would talk about the different sort of emphases, whatever the word is, that they wanted to use for this programming. And one of the things was emotion recognition. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Motion recognition. And I got the idea that I could use these earth magnets on put some on the puppet under the fabric of the face, and then put some on the back of the features, and you could like change the eyes so that they would reflect a different emotional state. And it was also going into character development. You could sort of like, they were really big on like performances that revealed a process of whatever the art. It was no longer enough for a show just to be a show, but the performance was meant to be the performance was meant to present an aspect of the work that you do. So it's not a puppet show, but it's a puppet show about doing puppet shows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
How esoteric can we get?
Right.
So, but the magnets were a real revelation in that, because otherwise you're trying to figure out how to work with Velcro, or the Muppets use a lot of toupee tape, like double face tape, to do all that kind of stuff, which just for that kind of performance, where you're going to have to do it repetitiously over and over and over again, is just going to wear out the fabric on the puppet and everything else.
Right.
So the magnets allowed for it would go in a very specific place, like you had to strategically place them on the puppet's head.
Right.
And so they would always lock into that one place wherever the magnets were, which was great. So I'd done that years ago. That was, I guess, maybe around 2010 or so. And it worked well. It wasn't my favorite show, but I liked that aspect of it. And so I kept thinking, I would really like to do something else with that idea. And so when this opportunity to do these library shows came along, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to revisit using these magnets to change facial features. So I developed this thing called Face It Fred. And so Fred is this puppet that has no face when he comes out of the trunk, and we spend the better part of the bit figuring out what Fred is supposed to look like.
Oh, sweet. Love that.
Yeah, and it works. Like, the kids love it. It's a
Of
great
course.
thing. And so we try all these different things. Like, I have this toolbox that has all of, and this was another revelation of like, how am I going to cart all these features around, because you don't want them to stick to each other. And I'm like, a metal toolbox. They'll just stick onto the box itself.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like, brilliant. I'm such a genius.
Oh my
So, and it has a couple of drawers too, so that the hair pieces and all that kind of stuff can be neatly tucked away. I mean, that was the other part of it too, is like, I didn't want to just like throw the stuff into a container or whatever, because then it would have to do so much prep between each performance of the thing. So this really allows for you to be able to preset as you're taking stuff off and everything. So it really works well.
Wow.
So he runs the gambit of the wrong face. We put features on him that make him, he has pigtails and some eyelashes, so he looks like a little girl. We have one where he turns into a dog, and one where he turns into a really weird, ridiculous looking creature with horns and googly eyes and all this kind of stuff. So it really plays with the scope of like what you can make this thing look like based on its facial features. And then we find out that Fred has a portrait of himself in the box, and so the kids have to they match up like his facial features with the drawing, as far as like, well, this is what it's supposed to look like, so we have to have a green nose, and you put the wrong color nose on. It's like, no, it's supposed to be green, or what, so there's a lot of interaction and participation in it too. So it's a good bit. Like, it's a solid bit.
Like, I mean, interactive with kids is.
Yeah, well, it's a fine line when you're developing stuff that has to have participation in it. You have to know how to navigate that. Like, you really have to know how to ask the question with how to get the answer you want.
Yes.
That's important. And I don't think people really realize that, because it just seems like, well, you're just up there asking questions of the children and they're answering. And it's like, you have to know that there's going to be some little jerk kid out there who's going to be like, no, or, oh, you did that, or, whatever they're going to say. they're intentionally going to say the thing you don't want them to say.
Right.
So the trick there is to like, how do I word this question in such a way that guides them to the answer, and that they're gonna give the right answer. Um,
Yep.
I also had to watch it too because Fred has no legs, and so he comes up with no face, and he says he thinks that he needs his glasses, so we put these glasses on. He's no face, and I said, "Well, Fred, I think your problem is a little more involved than having needing your glasses." And so I stupidly asked, "What else? What is Fred missing?" And then some little kid said, "Legs."
Ah,
And I was like, "Well, I asked for it. I
I
did ask
love
for
it.
that."
Yeah. Kids are honest. They won't lie.
Well, they'll see it. I mean, they'll point it out.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think I'm gonna hit. I'm gonna stop recording. I need like an outro.
Oh, I've talked for, oh gosh, over an hour now.
Oh,
Jeez.
but you have so many good stories. Like as you were talking, I was like, "That's a clip, and that's a clip, and that's like all these bites I can take and use on